Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, August 16th, 2011. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance.
For which it stands, visible,
roll call, please.
Casper?
Here.
Fearborn?
here,
Bryson?
here,
Knutson? Shannon?
Here.
Ward?
here.
Emery?
Here. Mr. Townsend, any agenda changes or revisions other than the notification that item 6-2 is you're going to ask for a later public hearing date?
None other than that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, you have received electronically the minutes of the August 2nd meeting of the Planning Commission. Any questions, additions, corrections, deletions, etc.? Hearing none, a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Public comments on non-agenda items or agenda items 6, 7, and 8. 6, 7, and 8 includes 3 public hearings, 4, one of which we're going to ask to be postponed. 7 is old business, of which there is none. New business, there is none. Public could either comment now or during the public hearing. Okay. Final orders, resolutions, and written communication. There are none at this point. There very well may be some at the end of the meeting, so stay tuned for that. The first order of business then, and I'll get The public hearing is now open for the purpose of considering amendments to the zoning ordinance. The proposal is identified as file ZOA 2011-05, and the City of Lincoln City is initiating the proposed amendments. The proposed ordinance would delete the definition of height from the Nelscott Plan District Zone and would also make an allowance for measuring building height when a property is located in a flood zone and required to elevate to comply with flood regulations. The Planning Commission's role in the legislative process is to consider any written or oral comments or testimony, as well as information from staff, and present a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold an additional public hearing. The City Council may adopt the Planning Commission recommendation, may adopt a different recommendation, or may take other action, including declining to make a decision. The substantive criteria that apply to this hearing include the statewide planning goals, the city's comprehensive plan, and the unamended portions of the city's zoning ordinance. Comments and testimony should be directed to these criteria or to other criteria that you believe apply to the subject of this hearing. Before the staff presents a report, I would like to summarize the public hearing procedures which have been adopted by the City Council. The brochure outlining these procedures is at the entrance to the Council chambers. The staff will present a report and respond to any Planning Commission questions. After that, any person may speak for up to 3 minutes. If the Planning Commission has questions, your time responding to any question will not be counted in your time limit. If you wish to speak, please write your name and mailing address clearly on the sign-up sheet at the entrance. Please speak directly to the microphone and begin by stating your name and mailing address. If you also have written testimony to submit into the record, please provide a copy to the recorder. Mr. Townsend, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, there's suggesting 2 amendments to things relating to measurement of building heights, one with a specific regard to how the ordinance calls out measuring in Nelscott, and then also with respect to flood zones. When we amended the ordinance for measuring height recently, we established the lower level, what you measure from, is either existing grade or approved grade, and then it's measured to the highest point of the building, wherever that is. And with the exception of in Nelscott, there is a provision in the Nelscott zone that allows measurement to the midpoint of the roof rather than to the highest point of the roof. And this was not put in intentionally. This was left from a consultant's draft and inadvertently was never taken out. The rest of the city we measured to the highest point of the building, and we're recommending taking out the unique provision in Nelscott and making it like the rest of the city. Again, it's just there as a result of an oversight. Then turning to the floodplain revisions, in this we're proposing that we establish a way of measuring building height in the flood zones that's other than from the ground level, basically, or potentially other than from the ground level. We were proposing measuring building height in what's called the AE or VE flood zones. I'll explain what those are. From 1 foot above the mapped base flood elevation. We have maps prepared by the Federal Emergency Management Agency of the entire city that shows where the floodplains are and establishes what's called the base flood elevation, which when you build in that flood area, you're supposed to elevate the lowest floor a foot above the base flood elevation. And then there's also what's called the AO flood zone, and the proposed revisions would result in measuring building height from 1 foot above the measured flood depth. The difference is in the VE or AE zones, it may say the base flood elevation is 20 feet. And so based on the particular projection that's used. And so you'd measure from that 20 feet or a foot above it. In the AO zones, they don't set a flood elevation, they set a flood depth. And everywhere in the city that I've found, it's the flood depth is 1 foot. So in an AO zone, it would be 1 foot plus within 1 foot above that. So the AO zones, again, are, by definition, they have a flood depth of 1 to 3 feet. And as I said, in Lincoln City, I've only found them with a depth of 1 foot.
What
1 to 3 is nationwide are the possibilities.
What dictates that? I mean, why?
Sorry?
What's the flood depth? I mean, what dictates the flood depth? Was there an existing flood there at one time, or what is the?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure how they set it. They have an algorithm of how they do it, some model that they use. I'm just not sure how it works. As you'll see as we go through this, the flood stuff gets pretty complex. But in the AO zone, they say it's usually sheet flow. In other words, it's just a body of water moving, usually on sloping terrain. And on the maps that I'll be showing you, that's the areas that are in yellow, or zoned A, or the AO zone. The AE zone is a 100-year flood zone with the base flood elevations that have been determined. That's what I was talking about, where there might have said that it's 20 feet or 16 feet or whatever, and then you measure from that level or a foot above it actually what's being proposed as a possibility. The ground level may be some distance below that, and that's one of the issues that we want to talk about, and that's why we're talking actually here, because of that difference. Then there's also what's called the VE zone, which is the 100-year coastal flood zone with a velocity hazard, and that's wave action. I'm showing the VE zones as blue and the AE zones as pink on the maps. And I went through a number of different places in this city trying to see what these proposals would mean in terms of how much elevation there would be. So this is the southern part of Cutler City. The pink, as you can see, is the AE zone. The yellow is the AO zone. This line running down here with the 10 through it is the 10-foot contour. As you can see, there's another dashed one just a tiny bit above it, and that's approximately the sort of the edge of what would be the bluff, if there was a bluff in Cutler City, but really where the ground level is above the bay. And then there's this next one is 14 feet. You can see how that goes along. these contours are from our LiDAR. It's extremely detailed and accurate measuring of elevations. So we have along the bay, which is the southern part here, the bottom part, an AE zone with a 14-foot base flood elevation. So you would elevate your ground floor to 15 feet, and the proposed amendment would start measuring from there, from 15 feet. And again, as I say, like here is 14 feet right here. This is 16 going up in here on these lots. So you're looking at no difference or a couple of feet difference in these areas. Over in here, separated a bit from the immediate shoreline, are some other areas, and actually there's some tiny little spots of 10 feet, but this contour again is 12 feet through here. So you can see that you're looking at 2 or 3 feet in this part of Cutler City, and that's consistent with throughout Cutler City. So a 2 or 3 foot difference in what's allowed now versus what this ordinance would allow, and how you measure height would allow an increase of a couple of feet. This is the most complex area in the city right here, along the Taft shoreline, along the bay. You can see there's all these different VE zones along here, varying from 16 to 21 feet. And then all these AE zones here in the pink, varying from 13 to 19 feet. Most of the VE zone is beach, because there's seawalls along most of here. For instance, right here, where this AE 16 here, that's where Moe's is located. And then it goes, there's a seawall around it. You can see where it is, and the beach is down here below. And it looks to me that you can see some small areas of 20 feet. So it's maybe 14 to 16 feet there anyway right now in the Moe's area. And it varies depending on exactly where you are. But you can see the complexity that we have to deal with here and exactly what it is. And this would, as here and everywhere else, if this amendment is adopted, the surveyor would have to establish what the base flood elevation is at that spot, exactly where that is in the air from the existing ground, and then measure from there.
So basically it would put everybody's first floor at the same level?
No, not necessarily.
No, not necessarily. Okay.
Because, for instance, here where it says AE 14, the first floor's got to be at elevation 15. But right here where it's AE 16, the first floor has to be at elevation 17. So they would not be at the same level. They'd be at varying levels.
Okay.
This is another area of Taft, right in here at 48th and Inlet. This is where the old community college building is, formerly Fire Hall and then community college. You can see this 10-foot contour is where there's a drainage channel through there. And the elevation is 14 feet, so this lot goes from 10, this dashed line is 12, so you'd see anywhere from 3 to 5 feet roughly probably in elevation difference that would result if this amendment is adopted. And similar out here, all these the 10 is low, and so anything outside these little circled areas of 10 is going to be higher. But not much higher because these other little tiny dashed circles are 12 feet.
I guess that's where I got confused with my last question. I mean, water finds its own level, so...
Well, yeah, and that's what makes this so strange to me. There's several different flood levels there. What makes it, for instance, over here between 16 and 19, what makes the 3-foot difference when you cross the line?
Yeah.
Ask FEMA. I don't know.
Okay.
In Nelscott along Anchor, we have a VE zone of 27 feet, and you see here's this 20-foot line is, this heavy line is 20 feet. It's probably just below the level of the bluff. It's probably, looks to me from looking at this, that the bluff varies from 22 to 24 feet through here. This line sort of going in here is 24 feet, right immediately parallel to the 20-foot line, right closer to the 22-foot line, which makes me think it's a steep slope there, so it's going up very quickly. So you see we have the VE zone of 27 feet. The ground level varies probably between somewhere just above 22 to just above 24 feet. So you're talking then 4 to 6 feet maybe increase. Over here is an AO zone, 1 foot. Again, so you have to elevate 1 foot above the 1 foot, so 2 feet above the ground level is what it would be required there. In another area of Nelscott, and this is probably the most problematic in my mind, this is where we have a line drawn 27 feet to the north of the design. This is 35th coming down. This is where the new beach access was put in with the new restroom and so on. North of that is 27 feet. South of it's 34 feet. 7-foot difference. This is the 20-foot line here. This is 24 feet. So the ground level is between 24 and 26 feet in this on these lots here. And you're looking at 34-foot base flood elevation, so they would have to be elevated to at least 35 feet. So you're looking at 8 to 10 feet of height difference. So it's a small area where this extreme result is found, but I just want to draw attention to it. Then along the D River, there's several different zones. We have 24 and 21-foot VE zones. This brown line here is the 20-foot line, and it goes up to 30 feet here. So, for instance, like this is the D Sands Hotel, and it's on at least it's I'm sure it's elevated above the base flood level now. On the east side of the highway, we have the AO, the sheet flooding 1 foot depth, and then you get into a little bit further east, you get into the AE zone, where it's 17 feet. It's hard to tell exactly what it is in here, but the outermost heavy contour is 20 feet. So, and it's dropping down as it goes towards the river, which is here, and a few little areas of 20 here. So, 20, 18, 16. This channel, the surface of the channel is probably at about 14 feet. And probably the surface of the lake is as well, about around 14 feet, according to this, would be where it would be measured from. So all these lots here in the Crystal Lagoon area would have to elevate above 14 feet to they have to elevate now, but they would measure from essentially an elevation of 18 feet, which is 1 foot above the 17, to which is somewhere around 3 or 4 feet above the existing ground level. And more of the same, just moving a little bit further east. And then in the Indian Shores area, there's a 20-foot contour, and the elevation, or the base flood elevation is 17 feet, and the main area of the lots are between 16 and 18 feet, so they would be gaining a foot or two or a couple of feet in potential building height around the sort of canal that's there, the lagoon. In one area of Wacoma, there's mapped flood area or flood zone, a VE zone with an elevation of 32 feet. This is the 30-foot line here, and it goes into here. So it looks to me like most of that area is more than 30 feet high to as much as 34 feet high already. But again, they would probably gain maybe a couple of feet, 2 or 3 feet in some of the area as a result of the height increase. And then on the east side of Jetty Avenue was the AO zone. There would be 2 feet of additional height would be allowed there because of the 1 foot AO zone. And then in Rhodes End, which is not in the city, but I thought it was important to bring it up. There's several different minor variations in the VE zones. This one's the more extreme. It's 38 feet. The bluff is probably at about 28 feet. So the oceanfront lots would have potentially may have some a substantial increase in height. As you go inland a little bit, even on some of these oceanfront lots, it becomes just a 1 foot AO zone, so it'll be a 2 foot increase from the ground level. So I know that's confusing, and but I just trying to show that in most areas we're talking about 2, 3, 4 feet potential increase in allowable building height, up to as much as 10 feet in allowable building height. I'm trying to explain the impacts of this proposal. So I think the issues to be looked at are, of course, Nelscott making that proposed change on going halfway up the roof. I think that's important. As far as the flood things, this is not a staff-initiated proposal on the floodplains. Some people had expressed concern about the being compressed between the not being able to build up instead of having to use the existing grade level and a decreased height limit, for example, in Nelscott. And so we're bringing this forward. I'm not convinced it's a good idea. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm not advocating for or against it. I just said I would bring it forward. The big question is in my mind, what unintended consequences are there? We've done analysis based on the information we have, but is it at such a scale we're missing things at a smaller level that might be important? Or are there other unintended consequences? Impacts on neighbors would, allowing somebody to build 4 feet higher in front of you affect you. And if you weren't anticipating that would happen, for example. And this would just sort of be giving somebody, the people in the floodplains, increase and potentially adversely affecting the people outside the floodplain. Then we also say in the proposed amendments that would be the measurement would be from 1 foot above the base flood level, which is the ground floor level, where the first floor has to be elevated 1 foot above base flood level. Should we echo that if you decide that this is a good idea, or should we just say it should be at base flood level? That's where you measure from. We're talking about a foot difference, but a foot can matter to again, the people across the street or whatever. There's nothing magical about either number. Just suggesting maybe you want to consider that. And I bring it up because unless somebody's doing a slab, slab on grade kind of construction, there almost always is a crawl space or something under the building, and so they're elevated anyway a little bit. So why not take into account that elevation in the?
But they're going down a foot or two into the ground, and then they're coming up maybe a foot above existing grade. I mean, to get that crawl space, that's
sometimes, yeah. Yeah.
I think that, as I mentioned when we kind of kicked this around, I'm concerned that somebody in a flood zone, I mean, the average, 3 or 4 feet, 2, 3, 4 feet probably isn't a big deal, but then, you mentioned there may be that 8 to 10 footer, and now all of a sudden he's going up, I'm going to exaggerate and go with 10, he's starting his first floor at 10 feet, and then he's going up 35 feet from that. So we've got a 45-foot high building there.
Right.
Maybe there could be some kind of language, and again, this is just for conversation, that if the level that they build, exceeds 3 feet above existing ground level, that they can go up maybe halfway. So if it's 3 feet to set, there has to be. I'd hate to give them the full 10 feet because it is going to disrupt neighbors. It is going to cause problems, and I'm not opposed to giving them a little bit of a. I don't know if break is the right word, but meeting them halfway, and if they have to go up to 10 feet, maybe give them 5 feet or 3.5 feet or something, whatever the difference is.
Well, that's essentially what my next point was, that another possibility is you could put a cap on the amount of additional height allowed, and that's whether it's some percentage or it would be just absolutely X number of feet. You couldn't go more than that. Just possibilities. So that's all I have. Oops. So.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions of Richard?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to try to bring this back just so if anybody wants to use it, they can.
Now is time for public comment and testimony. I don't have the sign-up sheet. Did anybody sign up to talk to this on this hearing? Okay, come on up, Gary.
Good evening. My name is Gary Ellingson, and my mailing address is 3417 Southwest Anchor, and I reside at 3406 Southwest Beach. I would like to thank you for your service and to tell the Planning Department I appreciate their foresight in allowing the discussion of measurement of building height in flood zones to be discussed here this evening. I would also like to thank the NewsGuard for, in the last edition, publishing the article concerning this, or at least the introductory language concerning this. And as you can tell from my talking, I'm not very good at trying to explain my thoughts. But if you can bear with me for a moment, I would like to share with you the history of my family and I in this area, as it might help you to understand part of this process. Number one, I understand the sum of what is being discussed here tonight is not just about me, but involves others as well. But I would like to give you a very brief, incomplete history of my experience. Prior to my moving here full-time in 1985, I worked out of the Portland area, sometimes at the Salishan Spit, doing construction work. During that time, when I would have an hour or two to spare, I would come up to the Lincoln City area and see if there were any business opportunities so that I could bring my wife and children down and we could all live here together. I found a small 3-story motel with empty adjoining land in Nelscott, which the owners, Don and Lorraine Noble, were willing to sell on contract. I knew about the importance of zoning and checked to make sure it was appropriate for that use. At that time, we were in a recreation commercial zone, which had a building height, I thought of 44 feet, but it might be 45. I checked with the immediate neighbors to make sure a motel in the area was okay with them, as I realized how important it would be to have good relations as one aspect for our customers to want to come back. We wanted to offer people a beachfront experience at an affordable price so they could have the same experience that we had had by coming to the beach. So what does any of this have to do with the present situation? Well, I realize that for a hoped-for future addition, which we completed, there would be a then newer, imposed, and very necessary minimum floor height required by FEMA, but felt comfortable knowing I could comply with the requirements for a standard 3-floor building with a modestly pitched roof because of the then 45-foot height regulation. One of my desires has always been not to have a building that is non-conforming, which is partially what has now happened because it lowers the value of the building. I had been under an impression, and I would go so far as to say maybe even an assurance that there would be non-conforming provisions protecting existing lawfully built structures in the mixed-use overlay zone, which we are now in. The only non-conforming allowances I can presently find are in the cottage zone, of which I'm not in. I know I should have interjected, and I'm not trying to confuse one matter with the other, but just to explain to you why the minimum height is so important to me now. I should have interjected more during the overlay process, but was not in a position to do so at the time. The fact of the matter for us now is we are limited to a height of 35 feet from basically uninterrupted ground. Coupling this with the base flood elevation is why I am here. If I ever wanted, which I want to emphasize I have no plans for, to replace the oldest section of our building, which was there when we bought it, with a similarly sized structure under the present ordinance, I probably could not do it. I don't know what the economic future holds in store. Who knows what someday might be on the property. In terms of structure, a portion of our property has always been an overnight rental, and that goes back to the 1930s. That doesn't mean that it always will be. It's just that when the day comes where we have a choice to make of where to go from where we're at, I don't want what presently exists in its totality to be automatically eliminated. I have some ideas concerning height if you'd care to listen to them, although they're not specifically related just to me. And I also have some ideas of why a small motel business is important in Lincoln City, if you'd care to hear any of those reasons. You don't have to.
I guess if it's relevant to what we're talking about, then yeah, but if it's not, then, I mean, you're certainly going to have an opportunity at City Council to perhaps go off on this in different tangents if you want to.
Not necessarily. I mean, actually, the Speaker has the right to say whatever he wants to the Planning Commission. I think what he's asking is, do you want more testimony? If you say no, he could still provide more testimony.
You can still what?
He can still provide additional testimony unless he runs out of time or there's a time constraint.
Relative to City Council, I asked Council whether it would be allowable for me to testify here this evening. I didn't want to skirt any ethics rules, and was told that as long as this doesn't involve just me, but rather others as well, that I could testify, which I believe this does. And the personal testimony that I gave was just trying to lend kind of some ancillary or some background information to just our case, but it could exist with others as well. If I'm allowed to vote at the council, and I don't know that I am,
Right.
I will not.
Yeah.
I would not. I would not do that, because I think it would be skirting something that would not be proper.
I mean, this is putting me in a difficult position, Gary, as I think you can realize, is that, generally, the city council, as member of the city council, have essentially said the public has 3 minutes to testify.
Okay.
And, you've gone beyond that.
Okay.
And if you can summarize it in, a couple more minutes, I would
No, that's
appreciate
fine.
it.
I didn't know procedurally. I didn't see the clock up there going, so if I've gone beyond my time, it wasn't intentional.
There's a clock up there? We've never used a clock. I mean, I didn't even know there was one up there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we use the clock, and
Oh, okay.
it goes from green to red when you
okay.
have
Well,
just
interesting.
an amount of time left, and then it...
But go ahead. I mean, if you can summarize in 2 or 3 minutes, go ahead.
No, thank you for your time here this evening. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Does anybody have questions? I'm sorry. Anybody have questions at this point?
Well, I guess I'm a little lost as far as what Gary would like to see, or how he feels that this is going to affect him and other owners that may be in the same situation. What you like or like about these proposed changes. What is I got lost as far as what your position or your reason for testifying was, to be truthful with you.
Well, I thought I had a clear picture of that answer myself until I got to reading. Basically, I misunderstood Richard's position as more of a recommendation and not and I don't mean to be speaking for Richard, but kind of a neutral, here is what it is, and I'm not advocating for or against.
Mm-hmm.
So, to the end of advocating for, I would like to state that if in a business like the one I have, the size of it helps produce income. And so having 3 floors, which we do, with a modest roof, and I understand about, building a taller pitched roof and doing some of that stuff, and that's not what we've ever been about. But it would, as long as we're in the motel business, be a desirable thing for me to do. What the basic situation, I think, right now, and somebody can correct me, is we have a 35-foot height limitation, and then we have a base requirement from FEMA. And so to comply with both of those things, our building off the ground would technically be a little taller than 35 feet. I don't know how to answer the question more simply than that. Let me see.
I kind of feel what you're trying to say is that changing the flood height, the foundation height, and then putting the 35 feet above that is a benefit to you and other businesses along the ocean front?
Yes, it could be. And, I'm not sure that it would have to be, and I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but
No.
for new people or for people that are just coming on board with this, that it would have to be, for everyone, or Joan could correct me, maybe it does have to be for everyone. And it sounds self-serving because we happen to have a business and it's already up that would get some special consideration, but I know that there are other businesses that this would also apply to. Kind of one of the things that happened not too long ago is we, through no fault of our own, had a fire in one of our units. And had it not been for the quick action of basically the people who work for me, it could have gotten, relatively speaking, it wasn't a very bad fire, but it happened to be in this lowest section of the motel. And so it just got my mind going, if we ended up having, for some reason, to replace that section, under the present rules, it would be 2 stories instead of 3 if we had a modestly pitched roof on the top of it. And I personally don't care for flat roof buildings, and I hope if this is being listened to as this thing loops through, that if you have a flat roof building, you don't hold this against me. It's just a personal preference. So.
Okay, Michelle, I think your question helps me, because it seemed to me that more of what I was hearing you saying was that there would somehow you would like to be grandfathered in, and if something did happen to where you could go back to your existing height, and I think that's a completely different issue than what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I realized I didn't want to confuse one thing with the next, and the fact that the overlay is as it is. As I thought, because when I was testifying, representing Ward, or having been voted in by Ward 3, I would just kind of pay attention, and I walked through some of the areas, particularly down in Taft, that Richard's talking about. And I know one building down there in particular would be impacted, probably more than that. The Taft overlay, and I'm not sure what supersedes what, is I've got the building height ordinance, and it clearly specifies now 35 feet up to, if you're near the ocean, or up to a certain number of feet away from the ocean. But I think in parts of the Taft overlay, there's actually a provision for 38 feet. And I think in parts of the Taft overlay, there are also provisions for non-conforming buildings. Exactly how that reads or what it reads, I don't know. I haven't, but this is just kind of my limited investigation to this point. So, and thank you for your comment. I could have said exactly what you did in 20 seconds, and I'd have been good to go. So I've rambled on.
Other questions at this point?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Anybody else wish to speak either favor, against, or neutral? Is there any comment from representatives of public agencies? If there's no further comment, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing is closed. Okay, what's the pleasure of the commission? Michelle, go ahead. Let you start it. Lucky you.
There needs to be a cap, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know the best way to figure that out, but if we're talking 11 feet above floodplain in some areas, then you're talking a 45, 46-foot building, and that's not really fair to anybody behind the building. So I'd like to see whether you work it out as a minimum or a percentage, I'd like to see a cap on it.
Well, you actually, if I can jump in here, you actually do have a cap. It's not in the zoning ordinance, it's in the city charter. And what that says is, notwithstanding any other provision of law, you can't actually have a structure used for human habitation more than 45 feet in height in the city unless the voters approve it first. The second part of that says, basically, for purposes of this section, height means the vertical distance from the average of the finished ground level at the center of all walls of the building to the highest point of the roof, exclusive of chimneys. So I think the way that height is defined is a little bit different from what we have in the zoning ordinance. But that is a cap, 45 feet for a dwelling, anything used for habitation.
Finished grade, though?
Finished ground level at the center of all walls of the building. It's the average of the finished ground level for all 4 of those walls. So I guess if you had a slope, you would add all 4 and then take the average.
Haven't we had people play the game with that already and bring in fill to create a false or a higher finished ground level and justify the height of their building?
Yeah, let me speak to this. The provision in the charter used to be echoed word for word in the zoning ordinance. The charter sets an absolute cap of 45 feet in the city, measured from finished grade, whatever that is. The zoning ordinance has another way of calculating height now, and that's from existing grade or approved grade, both of which result in some form of finished grade, ultimately, when the building's built. So what would happen here, for instance, the property we're talking about, southwest 35th, where conceivably you're going to add 10 feet to the allowed height. The allowed height there is 35 feet, so the maximum, so you'd be going up to 45, and in any event, would say the charter controls, and you couldn't go above 45 feet no matter what. So there's an absolute cap citywide of 45 feet for habitable structures. But I think what you're talking about, Commissioner Shannon, is a different cap, a cap of some function of the amount of difference that would result from measuring, the difference between measuring from the ground and measuring from what the flood level is. Some percentage or some absolute 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet or whatever it would be.
That's what I'm leaning towards, yes.
Well, if there's an absolute cap of 45, why are we not being consistent and saying 45 throughout everything and saying no deviation therefrom?
We are being consistent saying you can't be above 45, but we're saying in some zones we want you to be below 45. In Taft it's 38, in other areas it's 35.
Well, and what you're grappling with is 35 from what?
Well, yeah, 35
You know,
from
so-
what? And so if it can be 35 feet, and now they have this flood zone thing, like I think Michelle and I are kind of on the same page. So now you've got 10 feet of stilts to get this thing, the ground floor, up to where it's supposed to be, and you're measuring from the ground floor. You've got 10 feet of stilts and 35 feet of building. You're at 45 feet. I don't like that myself. I think that if they're going to go up 10 feet with the stilts, I'm using stilts because that's more visual, that maybe they can have 50% of that, and so now instead of going to 45, they can go to 40 feet. And maybe we're going to give them a little bit, but we're not going to give them the full 10 feet. I think that's just going to. I don't like it.
And again, I want to emphasize that extreme example of 10 feet. I've only found it existing on 3 lots. So it's a small area. Almost everywhere we're talking 2 to 4 feet, or maybe 5 feet in general.
Anything else, Michelle? Alex?
Well, I'm inclined to agree with the cap. And I'm assuming you have it be a function of the whatever that extra allowance would be, just to have it kind of low or something like that better. I'm curious about that function aspect rather than just having it be a flat 3 or 5 feet. But either way, I'm in favor of giving a little latitude on this for those occasions. I will say that for Gary, it sounds like I think that there's some legislation. Kate and I were talking just before the meeting in process now for you're probably familiar with it, where natural disasters destroy 50% of your building. You can actually take it to that non-conforming state again. I'm not sure that even if we allowed it this in its present form without the cap, that it would be sufficient for you if it destroyed half of your building. But, so that's where I stand.
Okay. Eric, anything else you want to add?
No, if I guess if Richard says there's only 3 or 4 buildings that it would affect in the city, if the average is going to be 3 or 4 feet, then I can live with that. But it's that extreme case that, and if there's not, I'll watch it'll come up next week.
There'll be one.
There will be one. I just if the average is 3 or 4 feet, then I'm not opposed to letting them have that exemption, or exemption is probably the wrong word to use, but I can go along with that.
Okay. Thanks, Doug.
.35-foot height ceiling we have now, and then somebody builds a, they can take into that standard that we have presently, base with slope. Flat roof house, but up 1 foot on the ground floor, you can still go up 35 feet, and you're still going to have the same amount of living space inside. It just depends how you design a building. But people front.
Okay, thank you. Judy?
I agree, too. I think there should be a restriction on the height. My concern is if you allow it to go up to what the charter says of 45 feet, I've seen a building torn down and went to the extreme height that it could, and as Doug mentioned, it was wasted space. It didn't have to be that high, but it was built that high because it could be. I tend to think that a cap on a situation where it needs to deal with the flood zoning is a good situation, and I really am not in favor of advocating for the 45-foot absolute areas that are oceanfront.
Thank you. Well, my initial reaction after you finished, Richard, was if it ain't broke, then don't fix it kind of scenario. And I'm concerned that you haven't taken a strong position one way or the other in favor of this. And yeah, you've had a couple of people that have perhaps questioned it. It seems to me that if we kept things the way they were, it would certainly be possible for somebody to come in with a variance request and prove hardship for whatever reason, and then we could look at it on an individual-by-individual case as opposed to changing the standards and, if you will, loosening the standards with the impact on perhaps the neighborhood and the neighbors not being particularly pleased. So that's kind of my initial reaction.
Fair.
Yes, ma'am.
What would you define as a hardship?
Well, we have a variance. There's in order to get a variance, there's 4 things that need to be proved in the variance request, and I don't, off the top of my head, I can't tell you what they are right now. But
the major one is there's something unusual about your property that precludes you from exercising a property right, and owing to topographical constraints or whatever, something unique about the lot.
You could also design a specific type of variance. I guess the struggle I have a little bit with using the variance process is if there are a lot of properties that are similarly situated, it would be hard to argue that yours is different.
Right. True.
At least in the bigger flood zones, there's a couple hundred, aren't there, that are, Richard, that are in those? So hundreds. Enough that I've seen the commission before on that particular element basically find that it wasn't met because a lot of other houses are in the same situation. But that doesn't mean that you can't come at it a different way if you think there's a way to address it. I mean, I guess what the difficulty is then, if it's a application by application process, then that takes away some of the certainty that people will really want in advance to know, if I purchase a property and across the street is a property in the flood zone, can they possibly build to 40 feet in front of me, whereas my property across the street is at 35. So.
Yeah, I guess Judy brought up the good point about the ocean view, and I'd forgotten a little bit about that, and people across the street. I think we there needs to be a cap somehow.
And Richard, I'm sorry, could you, I got a little bit lost in the discussion when you were talking about 1 foot above the floodplain and 3 feet above. Did I miss something in there? I understood the 1 foot, but I got lost on the 3 foot.
I'm not sure.
It's 1 foot above the base.
The FEMA maps set a base flood level, say of 20 feet, whatever the number is, they vary. And then the lowest floor of the building has to be elevated a foot above that.
Right. Okay.
So one thing I was saying was, do you want to grant that additional foot as well?
So you're suggesting up to 3 feet then, maybe?
Well, what I'm saying is, just instead of measuring from 1 foot above base flood level, measure from base flood level. But I also was talking about in the AO zones, the FEMA has set a flood depth, which is different from a flood level, of 1 to 3 feet. But everywhere in Lincoln City, I've gone through the maps, everywhere in Lincoln City it's 1 foot. There isn't anything 2 feet or 3 feet that I've been able to find. Okay. So I don't know if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Could it be approached in something fairly simple, flood +1 with a cap of 4? That seems easy. Or 5, but so if you're saying flood or base +1 is 2 to 3 feet, in some cases it's 4 feet. Couldn't it just be per topography with a cap of 4 feet?
Sure.
Not too simple?
That would be simple. Be a maximum of 4 feet increase in height is what you're talking about.
You're saying not to exceed.
Not to exceed.
Right.
Into the mic, Doug.
I'm still on the other side.
We need the mic.
Into your mic.
I'm still on the other side of the street. That 4 feet is going to be a big difference. And I think there's ways you can build a house and not have a sloped ridge to the house and just use a flat roof. You're still going to get the square footage.
I know,
it's more expensive to build that way.
We live in Oregon, and flat roofs don't work so well on the Oregon coast. Is just a consideration, is that it's just...
Well, I own a flat roof house in Central Oregon, and I can carry a 96-inch snow load on it, and it's actually structurally more sound. I have less problems in that than people that have slope roofs, so I would take exception to that. I think flat roof houses can be built very structurally sound, and you get more square footage out of them. Usable square footage.
Okay.
So I'm still at that 35-foot cap, and then just you have to find either come back with a variance, or just meet the standards.
But with 200 properties, there's not going to be a hardship consideration for a variance. So.
Yeah, we've considered this almost exact same thing. And
yeah, we're pretty tough on variances.
Well, the statute
Right.
is pretty tough on variances.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. So we are, if you will, attempting to come up with a recommendation to send on to City Council. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Anybody want to make a motion at this point in time?
And remember that your motion or recommendation can be to not forward, to forward, or to go back to staff and ask for something different if this isn't what you want. So,
Well, it sounds like if we were to ask for something different, I'm not certain with the concerns that I've heard that it'd be met, but would you be set, I mean, just to figure out where we all are, I mean, would you be set, would you want it to be a function, a percentage of it, or would you be okay with a flat?
I'd be okay with a flat. I think there has to be, I think the flat might be easier for the guy across the street to calculate if he's looking at buying a lot, going, well, he's in a flood zone, he can go there instead of a percentage. So the flat is good with me.
Well, I'm not sure what else is being proposed, so why don't we just throw that out there and see what happens?
Let me just ask a question before we do that. And I'm not a builder, so I don't know the answer to this. Doug, maybe you can help. You're advocating flat roofs, and Gary indicated that he's very much opposed to flat roofs on a personal level. Would there be a way that we could do this without unduly complicating it by limiting the angle of the roof? In other words, to exceed the 35-foot height, you can have at 35 feet, you can have any kind of roof you want. If you're going to go up to 38 feet, your roof angle could not exceed X. If you went to 40, or whatever, somewhere along that line, without unduly complicating it. If our concern is blocking the view of neighbors and still allowing perhaps what several people feel that it's better to build a slope roof of some sort. I mean, if it's a 15-degree angle, 30, I don't know what my angles are, but would there be a way to do that without complicating it too awfully much?
Okay, I gotta say it. It's probably stupid, but I'm gonna say it anyway. As I look from my ocean view that I have, if it weren't for the fact that the houses were like this and not like this, I wouldn't have a view. It's the
because they are
looking through the angle of this guy's house.
Right.
So if he went up 35 feet with a flat roof,
Yep.
I'd see a big square building and no ocean, even though it's only that big.
Yeah, okay.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm just saying.
No, I see your point, and that's assuming that all the properties that are there are within the 35-foot.
Well, I guess we're assuming that.
Be facing that way.
Yeah, I understand.
I guess we're assuming where he's going to build that. I mean, I'm up in the air. I think we're all a little bit on the same page. We want to do what's right. So
Right.
going to make everybody happy on this, and best compromise is. Any ideas over there?
Again, as the city attorney pointed out, you got a whole range of things you can do. You can say, we recommend against this, we recommend for it, or we recommend something with a cap, like you're talking about, or something else. I don't know. And you don't necessarily have to do anything, and you certainly can do something if you want to.
you can also ask for options. You can say, we're not opposed to the idea theoretically, but could you come back with sort of like A, B, and C, or give us something to look at?
Oh, the problem solver.
Well, it's a difficult question, and I don't think we know the answer. So,
Judy?
I like that.
It sounded like a lot of us like the idea of putting a limited number on the height, and I think Shannon said up to 4 feet. Can we put that in some kind of a motion?
Sure.
And vote on that?
Sure. Do whatever we want at this point.
But I think it would be good to send some kind of idea off to the city to have them digest it, and maybe they'll come up with something else. But
So the 4 feet would include the 1 foot, right?
yes, a total.
Okay, total of 4 feet. Okay, go ahead and make your motion.
Somebody help me out here. I make a motion that we suggest that the height in the flood zone, hazard flood zones, be inclusive of no more than 4 feet, including the 1 foot above the flood zone elevation.
Okay, I think we understand what we're saying. Are we okay with that, Kate? Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Could we have roll call then, please?
Can we have discussion on
Sure. I'm sorry, yeah.
So does that mean that the somebody that's in the flood zone could build a house 39 feet then,
Right.
where it's presently 35 feet?
If the topography says that the flood,
Yeah, a maximum of
Cap is-
39. It could be 35 if, depending on where the flood level is relative to the actual ground level.
They don't automatically get the 4 feet unless their situation calls for it.
Okay, well, when he was pointing out on the map, I thought there was a lot of areas where that would cover.
That is.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions? Discussion? Okay. Kate?
Shannon,
yes.
Casper,
Yes.
Dearborn,
Yes.
Bryson,
No.
Ward,
Yes.
Emery.
No. The motion carries. Thank you. Okay, the next public hearing, and I guess the Clear Vision standards, public hearing is not going to be held, so do we need a motion to...
No, we don't need anything.
We don't need
We're
anything
just
for
gonna
that.
Start over on that
All right.
procedurally.
Okay, the public hearing is now open for the purpose of considering amendments to the zoning ordinance. The proposal is identified as file ZOA 2011-07, and the City of Lincoln City is initiating the proposed amendments. The proposed ordinance would make several minor revisions to regulations governing commercial design in the general commercial and recreation commercial zones. Amendments are proposed to improve organization and clarity and also propose a modified standard for parking lot lighting. The Planning Commission's role in the legislative process is to consider any written or oral comments or testimony, as well as information from staff, and present a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold an additional public hearing. The City Council may adopt the Planning Commission recommendation, may adopt a different recommendation, or may take other action, including declining to make a decision. The substantive criteria that apply to this hearing include the statewide planning goals, the city's comprehensive plan, and the unamended portions of the city's zoning ordinance. Comments and testimony should be directed to these criteria or to other criteria you believe apply to the subject of this hearing. Before the staff presents a report, I would like to summarize the public hearing procedures, which have been adopted by the City Council. A brochure outlining these procedures is at the entrance to the council chambers. The staff will present a report and respond to any Planning Commission questions. After that, any person may speak for up to 3 minutes. If the Planning Commission has questions, your time responding to any questions will not be counted in your time limit. If you wish to speak, please write your name and mailing address clearly on the sign-up sheet at the entrance. Please speak directly into the microphone and by stating your name and mailing address. If you have written testimony to submit, please provide a copy to the recorder. Will the staff please present its report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In 2007, we adopted commercial design standards for the city that apply in the general commercial and recreation commercial zones. We're proposing a series of amendments to those provisions. Most of them are minor grammatical changes or changes to increase the clarity without changing the substance of the ordinance. We are adding 2 new definitions, one for pearl and one for strings, because the ordinance has been referring to pearls and strings, and we do have pearl and string areas or at least pearl areas designated on the zoning map, but this is making it clear exactly what we mean by pearls and strings. So the pearls are Wacoma, Ocean Lake, D-Lake, Cutler City, actually Taft and Nelscott are all pearls. Nelscott and Ocean Lake and Taft have their own commercial design standards, though, so these commercial design standards don't apply there. They only apply right now in Wacoma, D-Lake, and Cutler City. And if D-Lake and Wacoma get get their own commercial design standards, then it wouldn't apply in those areas either. And the string areas are the areas just between the designated pearls. Looking briefly at the proposed changes, there's a change in section 17.740020 to correct a reference. Then some edits in 030 for clarification, and then 040, some, again, more clarity amendments, again, nothing substantive. And same thing as 050 on the guiding principles for strings. 060, there's the changes are more extensive. It's reworking the way the setback provisions are worded in I think 3 of the guidelines that we have there to make more clear what's meant, take out some ambiguities, and try to provide consistency between all the sections there. Then in 080, there is an exception. There's an 18-foot minimum height limit in the pearls. And there's an exception for some reason for a building that replaces an automobile-oriented use. In other words, you wouldn't have to rebuild to 18 feet. You could build to some lower level. And sort of unclear why that exception is there other than to encourage doing away with automobile-oriented uses in the pearls. But we're recommending taking that out. Then the window transparency standard is edited for clarity, and the building orientation provision is moved up to a little earlier in the ordinance without any substantive changes, just to put it where it belongs more appropriately. And some of the standards for building design, particularly the width of buildings, it refers to now just properties on the highway, and I think that was really not so much an intentional intent to distinguish between on and off the highway. It's just the focus was on buildings on the highway. I wasn't really thinking about commercial areas that are off the highway. Then we have a number of them, particularly in Ocean Lake, although this doesn't apply in Ocean Lake, but we do have areas where the commercial extends beyond the highway. And this would just make it clear that the intent is that the rest of the commercial areas be developed the same way as those that front on the highway. And just, again, some more clarity changes in 090. Then exterior lighting, I know, I wasn't at the meeting, but I know you all discussed it with Deborah Martson, the senior planner, about a proposed change. And where it says now that the maximum amount of light can't exceed 4-foot candles in a parking lot. We had proposed maybe a change there. We went out 10:30 a week ago Monday night. It was a clear night, a little more than a half moon shining, and measured how much light there was under the lights in various parking lots, and it varied from 1-foot candle up to about 8. We're suggesting maybe just leave this as it is, that maybe a change isn't needed. Most of what we measured was right around 5. There is flexibility in there. Basically, the planning director can provide needed flexibility if someone feels like they need more light for some reason and have a good reason to do that. So we're suggesting just leave it the way it is. Deborah also did some research and found that most places recommend a maximum of 4, so it's consistent with what we have now. Again, but we do have flexibility on top of that. That's basically it. I don't know if you have questions on this.
Okay, questions? Yeah, Doug?
Curiosity, Richard, is there a distinction made for clear parking lots versus parking lots that are covered in fog? And what I'm thinking is, I know amber lights or orange lights are more distinct when you have parking structures that are clouded in fog.
Actually, the basic answer is no. We don't say, you get more light for, if you have this kind of light, for example. But I know when we were out there with the light meter the other night, it was asking, is it a fluorescent light? Is it a sodium light? Is it a mercury light? And for some reason, I just scrolled through them, and the amount of foot candles changed. Same light, but depending on what we said the source was, the amount of foot candles measured changed. I assume that means it takes into consideration something have to do with the source, and so like a sodium light, which I think is the more amber ones, might be brighter in one sense, but still measure within what's allowed. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and from my observation, the sodium lights on a foggy parking lot give you more clarity what's in the parking lot versus a bright light.
I can speculate why that is too. Just occurred to me. I think it probably has to do with the wavelength of the light and the water.
I don't know.
It's towards the blue end of the spectrum. Maybe it's absorbing the blue end, and mercury lights are towards the blue end, and fluorescent lights are towards the blue end. So that could have something to do with it.
But I just know it seems more visually easier to see in a parking lot when it has those sodium lights versus when you have bright lights. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah,
But do you think that's something that should be covered?
I'm sorry?
Or do you think that's something we should consider? Because, we do get a lot of fog.
Well, would do it in terms of on foggy nights you could have brighter lights. Because I think technologically, I don't think parking lot, owners of parking lots are going to be out there turning them up or down or anything. So.
I don't know. It's just a thought.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably one reason why you see a lot of places going to sodium vapor lights.
I presume, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm presuming that what we're talking about here is non-public parking lots. In other words, not owned by the city.
It would be any parking lot. I think we measured the one out here. That was the first one we measured, but it would apply to city-owned parking lots as well.
Because it would seem to me that if it's a public parking lot, there's certainly, see you later, Alex, would have a need for more lighting for safety purposes than a business parking lot per se.
I'm not sure. I guess I don't understand why you would, because...
Well, I guess I'm thinking specifically, and I don't know because I haven't noticed it lately, but I know that the public parking lot in the Ocean Lake across from Maxwell's at various points in time has been very poorly lit. Maybe because it's not being maintained, but a couple of lights have been out, and it's been very dark in corners, and is probably not safe.
That goes to more to lighting design probably than the ownership. I don't think there are other parking lots in Ocean Lake that are privately owned, and I would think they would face exactly the same safety issues that lot owns, that lot has. But again, maybe it's more lighting design than ownership is an issue there.
That's probably true. By the same token, it seems to me that the city would have a liability, much more so in a public parking lot than in a privately owned one. Don't know.
I don't know.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to speak to this issue? Any comment from representatives of public agencies? If there's no further comment, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Is there anyone who would like to discuss this? If not, could we have a motion for a recommendation, please?
Okay, Mr. Chair, I move we forward listed commercial design standards amendments to the zoning ordinance 2011-06 to City Council.
Is there a second?
Would that be with a recommendation for
With
approval?
a recommendation of approval, sorry. Thank you.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Shannon,
Yes.
Dearborn,
Yes.
Bryson,
Yes.
Casper,
Yes.
Emery.
Yes. The motion is approved. The final public hearing is open space and park rezoning. The public hearing is now open for the purpose of considering amendments to the comprehensive plan map and zoning map. The proposal is identified as file CPA and ZC 2011-02, and the City of Lincoln City is initiating the proposed amendments. The proposed ordinance would rezone 31 parcels of publicly owned land to either park or open space. One additional parcel, which is residential and privately owned, is proposed to be rezoned single-family residential R15. The Planning Commission's role in the legislative process is to consider any written or oral comments or testimony, as well as information from staff, and present a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold an additional public hearing. City Council may adopt a Planning Commission recommendation, may adopt a different recommendation, or may take other action, including declining to make a decision. The substantive criteria that apply to this hearing include the statewide planning goals, the city comprehensive plan, and the unamended portions of the city's zoning ordinance. Comments and testimony should be directed to these criteria or other criteria that you believe apply to the subject of this hearing. Before the staff presents a report, I would like to summarize the public hearing procedures which have been adopted by the City Council. A brochure outlining these procedures is at the entrance to the council chambers. Staff will present a report and respond to any Planning Commission questions. After that, any person may speak for up to 3 minutes. If the Planning Commission has questions, your time responding to any questions will not be counted in your time limit. If you wish to speak, please write your name and mailing address clearly on the sign-up list at the entrance. Please speak directly into the microphone and begin by stating your name and mailing address. If you also have written testimony to submit into the record, please provide a copy to the recorder. Staff, please present its report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With one exception, this is a proposal to rezone publicly owned properties that were either purchased for open space purposes with open space bond money, or purchase or operate as parks now. The one exception is there's a piece of privately owned property that we're proposing to be taken out of the park zone or out of the open space zone and put into residential zone. That's as a result of a land swap with that property owner who gave the city some land for open space in exchange for this open space property would then go into residential use. I'll just try to highlight them. At the extreme north end of actually it's not even the city, it's not in the urban growth boundary, but it's in the city. The extreme north end of the city, there's 58.65 acres that the city has owned since, I think, 1996, that's zoned residential, and we're proposing that be rezoned to open space. And that's actually as part of the Villages at Cascade Head planned unit development. That property was set aside for open space purposes and donated to the city. Then there's the Holmes Road parking lot is zoned residential, proposing that be zoned park. There's a 4.1 acres of property off of West Devils Lake Road adjacent to other open space property that would be zoned open space. Right? Yeah, it's going to open space. a piece of property north of Curtis Park that we recently acquired with open space funds would go to open space. It's 1.8 acres. Skateboard park, well, actually, that other piece is zoned multifamily residential, and that would go into open space. Skateboard park is zoned R1, that would go into park zone. The Dorchester Park, behind the Dorchester House, it's principally tennis courts, is zoned general commercial, and that would go into the park zone. And this is where the Holmes Road parking lot is. This is Dorchester Park I was just talking about. There's the Dorchester House in the background there. And the skateboard park, adjacent to the ball fields at Curtis Park. Then, a little further south along the river, we have a piece of property. This actually is Dells Lake State Park, zoned R110. It's one of the 3 areas of the city that are zoned R110. Most of that R110 area we're proposing go into park. There's a little bit of R110 that is already residentially developed, and that would keep its R110 zoning. Then down here, adjacent to this already zoned piece of park, there's another piece of property that we acquired with, I believe that was with open space money as well. That's the Hostetler Park property, which presently is zoned general commercial, or recreation commercial, would go into open space zone. And this, remember, this is the new restrooms in Dells Lake State Park that were recently approved. We gave a variance for those. Just setting the scene here a little bit. The D River open space next to Highway 101. Then in the Agnes Creek corridor, we have that property swap I was talking about, where we take some property out of open space and put it into residential, and that piece of property is privately owned. We swapped that for some formerly privately owned property adjacent to it that now would be zoned for open space. And there's some property on the south side of Bard Road that's zoned RM that also would go into open space. And again, this is the Agnes Creek area. This gives you a better idea. This area here, this is on the property swap. This area here is what's currently is zoned open space. We're suggesting that be changed to residential. It's owned by the adjacent property owner, who gave up this bit of property here to the city, and this is zoned single-family residential. We want that to be zoned open space.
And is that just along Highway 101?
Pardon me?
Is that just along Highway 101?
No, this is Dune Avenue. Highway 101 is some distance off to the right.
Okay.
I can show you. This is the area we're talking about in here.
Thank you.
Here's Highway 101 over here.
Okay.
Then we have some land that we acquired from the community college would go to open space, as well as the Spyglass, almost 73 acres of land up behind the Spyglass apartments that would go to open space. That was purchased with open space funds. And that's up by the community college, I believe. Or is this by the high school?
By the high school.
This is by the high school then. So just so you know, this is the Spyglass open space. This is where the high school is, right in here. Then further south, there's this property just on the south side of the bridge over Schooner Creek. That's owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That would be zoned open space. And that's primarily already protected as part of the Slits Bay National Wildlife Refuge. There's an eagle nest up in there. And then there's, down in Cutler City, there's a couple of city lots that are zoned residential that would be zoned park. Then there's Lincoln County-owned property. This primarily is a big wetland by the big white barn the Nettleship Barn down in Cutler City area. That would be zoned open space as well. The properties that are owned by other governments than the city have either said they have no objection or they supported, the state park supported the change. The others have no objections to it.
Okay.
We're proposing.
Thank you. Are there questions of staff?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is there any person in the audience who wishes to speak? Any comment from representatives of public agencies? If there is no further comment, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any discussion that any commissioners would like to have at this point? If not, is there a motion to forward a recommendation of the City Council?
Mr. Chair, I move we forward comprehensive plan amendments and zone changes 2011-02 and to City Council and recommend approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Dearborn,
Yes.
Casper,
Yes.
Shannon,
Yes.
Bryson,
Yes.
Emery.
Yes. Motion carries. I forgot to mention after the two previous motions that the City Council will hold public hearings on these matters on August 22nd at the council meeting. And I presume that will be correct for the first one as well, even though we modified it a little bit.
Right.
Okay. That ends the public hearings for this evening. As indicated, there is no old business or new business. I do have script for adoption of final orders, but if I remember correctly, last time we didn't do that.
Right. We don't need it. We've got your
not necessary
recommendations.
So that finishes the business for the evening, gets down to reports and comments. Community Development Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only comment I have is you had at your desk tonight a memo from Deborah Martson relating to citizen involvement in the bicycle pedestrian plan. Just to refresh people's memory, we got a grant from through the Transportation and Growth Management Program of ODOT and the Department of Land Conservation and Development to develop a bicycle and pedestrian plan for the city. We'll be kicking that effort off actually later this week. One important piece of it is citizen involvement, and we are looking for advice and ideas from the Planning Commission on ways to promote citizen involvement in this process. The memo includes a sort of a schedule. It's a schedule without dates, but it shows you that there's some project advisory committee meetings and a couple of public events, and all the project advisory committee meetings and the public events are open to the public, and we encourage participation in that. The project advisory committee right now has 14 and hopefully 15 members, including Don Baker from the North Lincoln Fire and Rescue District, Bob Hunt, a citizen pedestrian advocate, Patrick O'Connor from the college, Joelle Archibald from the County Health Department, Stephen Bouchard from the police, Judy Casper from the Nell Scott Neighborhood Association, Liz Barden from Samaritan North Lincoln Hospital, Chio Sam as a liaison for the Hispanic community, Paul Robertson, Bike Advocacy Committee, Valerie Solihi from she's the County Planning Director, Dave Malcolm from the School District, Patty Morgan from Ocean Lake Merchants, Cinda Bruce from Lincoln County Transit, Alex Ward from Bay Area Merchants Association. That's 14. The 15th is we're also trying to get a representative from the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. I'm just throwing this out now just to sort of ask you to be thinking about this, about how we can promote citizen involvement in this whole process. And that can be things like how we reach out to people, whether we, have a web page or social media or something that's involved with this. The meetings that are on here are really the consultant meetings, but there can be other meetings as well. There's all sorts of things that can be done, and we just want to make sure that there's as much citizen involvement in this as we can get.
Good. Just as, when do we think Task 1 is going to commence?
Actually, we have a meeting on Thursday of, I think about 8 people are going to show up on that. That's meeting with the consultant and the project management team, which is principally city staff, to sort of get the ball rolling. So
good.
Soon, as far as the other things as well.
We presume that the News Guard will be cooperating and getting this information out.
Sure, they will. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
I have nothing else.
Okay. Joan?
I just have a suggestion to add to the list. Maybe there's an ADA advocate or organization that would be interested, and also a veterans organization. I don't know if those groups, but they tend to be underrepresented, and so there may be some interest in contacting them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
Another possible, maybe service club.
Yeah, Doug.
I was just wondering, too, I know that there is a defunct committee with the city for the roads, and I don't know if that committee should be reset up and somebody from that committee join that group too, because of the consideration with some of the existing roads we have in town and some of the things that'll go on with the roads.
I think that committee was officially disbanded, but I would have to go back and double check.
We can check it out. That's a possibility. Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? Anything? Okay, Joan, anything?
Mr. Chair, at the beginning, before we started the meeting, you mentioned that you had seen some information on the city's website that members of boards and commissions would be required to have background checks, and you asked if that applied to the Planning Commission and whether the City Council had requested that. So I'm just wondering, if everyone on the Commission would like the answer to that question, I'll try to bring the information back to you if there's a general consensus on it.
Where I found this, it says committee member volunteer application packet. The packet contains member volunteer application, criminal background check authorization, and a couple of other things. And I guess my comment is that not following this completely at the city council level. What my memory was that this was brought up and that this was something that was suggested by the mayor, but I was not aware that it had been adopted. But regardless of whether it has or not, I'm concerned that that's a unnecessary, onerous, additional requirement for volunteers, and that it's difficult enough to get people to volunteer for various committees in the city, and I think it just shouldn't be part of it. And I just wanted to make that public comment.
Okay.
So we don't know if I'd like to know. Going on.
I'd like to know. Okay. I take that as a consensus then. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else, planning commissioners?
No, thank you.
Any public comments on non-agenda items that we haven't talked about this evening? If not, next meeting, Mr. Townsend.
Next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, September 6th, but we have nothing on the agenda at this point. And so I would ask you if you want to cancel the meeting, or do you want me to come up with something?
I move.
How creative are you?
Loaded question.
It would be some kind of training. So.
What's the will of the committee?
I'll move if we don't have anything pertinent that we don't need.
I'm with you on that, so.
I agree.
Okay. Then maybe we'll have a meeting on September 20th.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all very much, and good evening.